When my son Jack first told me he was going to get married, I smiled through the tears I didn't want him to see. I hugged him tightly, whispered blessings, and tried to hold back the sudden ache in my chest. I had raised him, cared for him, worried about him every single day of his life. And yet, there was a small, quiet fear deep inside me, one I could not speak aloud. What if, after his wedding, the closeness we shared changed? What if he forgot that I had been there for him, from the scraped knees of his childhood to the sleepless nights when he was sick? I remember the day he met Rosie, his soon-to-be wife. She was polite, soft-spoken, with a bright smile that made him light up in ways I hadn't seen in years. At first, I welcomed her with warmth, thinking she would be my daughter in every way, not realizing that sometimes love for a new family can slowly cloud old bonds. The first meeting was calm tea in the kitchen, soft sunlight spilling through the window. Rosie laughed at something Jack said, and I noticed him glance at me, almost apologetic, as if my presence was no longer central in his joy. It was a fleeting moment, but it lingered in my mind long after the day ended. I tried to dismiss it. Perhaps it was just the excitement, I told myself. Jack would never forget me. I had been his mother, his guide, his comfort, his home. And yet, small things began to change almost imperceptibly. Conversations I once had daily became shorter. Visits became fewer. My son's eyes would flicker to Rosie before they landed on me. And though I told myself, it's just a honeymoon stage, a quiet ache settled in my heart. A heaviness I could neither lift nor speak about. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table alone, sunlight fading into the warm glow of the lamp above. I could still hear Jack and Rosie laughing in the living room, the sound familiar yet distant, like a melody from someone else's memory. I held a cup of tea in my hand, my fingers tracing the rim, thinking of the first day I held Jack in my arms, the tiny fingers that had once curled around mine. I remembered his first words, his first steps, the way he had fallen asleep on my shoulder countless times. And yet, now, his world seemed to spin without me at the center. I never raised my voice, never complained, never confronted him. I stayed silent. There is a strange strength in silence, a quiet dignity in letting someone live their new happiness while your own heart slowly aches. I reminded myself that love does not always need acknowledgement, that patience can be a gift to both giver and receiver. Still, each time I called his name and he answered with a distracted, "Yes, Mom," I felt a pang so sharp it was almost physical. Jack's father had passed years ago, leaving me with the dual responsibility of guiding our son and holding our home together. Every memory of him now seemed bittersweet. I would see Jack setting the table for Rosie, offering her the warm gestures I had once offered him, and a small voice in my mind whispered, "Have I been forgotten?" It wasn't immediate, this forgetting. It began slowly, almost imperceptibly. He would tell me he was busy. He would call once a week instead of daily. He would forget to ask about my day, about my health, about the little things I had always cherished sharing with him. And I, in turn, stayed silent. I smiled. I nodded. I offered help when asked. And I quietly endured the growing distance. I remember one rainy afternoon when I went to his home to help with some cleaning. Jack greeted me at the door, polite but hurried, as though he had somewhere else to be. Rosie stood behind him, her presence warm yet firm, and I noticed the way he gently placed her hand over his, almost instinctively. A memory of years past flashed before me. Jack as a boy, holding my hand while we crossed the street, asking me questions about everything and nothing. And now, he held someone else's hand in that same protective way, while my hand rested empty at my side. I smiled, stayed calm, and helped with the chores quietly, hiding the ache inside. Even in those moments, I found small comforts. I could see that Rosie genuinely loved him. I could see that they laughed together, shared moments that warmed my son's heart. And though a part of me ached, I reminded myself that love is not diminished by the presence of another. It is simply transformed, reshaped into something new. My role had shifted, I realized. I was no longer the center of his day, but I was still part of his world, part of his story. And that was enough. At least for now. There were nights when I would sit by my window, rain tapping softly against the glass, and pray. I prayed for patience. I prayed for Jack and Rosie's happiness. I prayed for the strength to endure the subtle heartbreak of slowly being forgotten. I prayed that Allah would see the love I had poured into my son, that he would protect him, and that he would guide me to accept this new chapter with grace. It is strange how life teaches us lessons quietly, in the softest, most unassuming ways. The first moments of forgetting were easy to overlook, small enough to ignore. But as days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the changes became undeniable. He called less. He spent more time with Rosie's family. He forgot small gestures, phone calls, asking after me, sharing the little joys of his day. And still, I stayed silent. I did not scold. I did not guilt him. I simply endured, carrying my love and my longing in quiet corners of my heart. And yet, there were moments of warmth that reminded me why silence could be powerful. Once, Jack held my hand when he noticed my hands were cold. Once, he remembered my favorite tea and brought it to me without asking. Once, he spoke of a memory from our past, a joke, a shared meal, a lesson learned, and for a fleeting second, it felt like old times. And in those moments, I realized that love cannot be measured by constant attention, but by the quiet recognition that bonds endure even when unspoken. The truth is, motherly love is patient. Motherly love is enduring. Motherly love is sometimes invisible to the eyes of the one it surrounds, but it is always felt, always present, and always guiding. I learned to hold my heart tenderly, to watch Jack grow into the man he was becoming, and to accept that my presence in his life might no longer be as obvious as it once was. Even when I felt forgotten, I reminded myself that love is not diminished by distance. Faith is not shaken by absence. And God, who knows every silent struggle, every hidden heartache, sees what the human I might miss. I held on to this quietly, letting it shape my days, my prayers, my patience. My name is Mary, and I had spent almost my entire life caring for Jack, my only son. From the moment he was born, my days were filled with lullabies, soft whispers in the dark, and endless moments of worry and hope. I remember the first night he slept in my arms, tiny chest rising and falling, the fragile warmth of life in my hands. Those nights were long, the world quiet around us, and yet I felt a connection so deep that nothing could ever break it. Those early years shaped both of us, the laughter, the tears, the scraped knees, the fevered nights when I whispered prayers, begging God to keep him safe. Jack was always a curious child. He loved stories, particularly those that seemed impossible, the ones that sparked wonder. I would read to him under the soft glow of the bedside lamp, my voice gentle, my hands brushing back the stray hairs from his forehead. His favorite story was always about a young boy who helped a lost stranger, a story about kindness, faith, and patience. I often thought about how those stories shaped him, teaching him compassion and humility in ways I could only hope would last into adulthood. As he grew, our home became busier, filled with school projects, friends' laughter, and the constant hum of life. I tried to maintain a balance between guiding him and letting him find his own way. There were times when I would sit quietly in the kitchen, watching him practice his handwriting or studying for exams, and I realized that these were the moments that truly mattered, the soft, almost invisible moments that form the heart of a childhood. Even the arguments we had, the tears and stubbornness, seemed to be part of the same rhythm of life, a pattern I cherished even when it frustrated me. Jack's adolescence brought its own challenges. His father, God rest his soul, had passed when Jack was only 12, leaving me with a house full of memories and a boy on the cusp of understanding a world that could be both beautiful and cruel. I remember holding him that night after the funeral, my arms wrapped around his shivering frame, whispering prayers into the dark. We were alone, and yet I promised him silently that I would always be there, that no matter what happened, he would never have to face the world without someone who loved him beyond measure. School, friendships, and teenage dreams filled his days. But home remained our sanctuary. I tried to maintain a warm, loving environment, cooking his favorite meals, leaving notes in his books, celebrating small victories with quiet joy. Jack loved to tease me, often calling me the boss of everything, laughing at my insistence on order. I smiled, enjoying the rhythm of our days, never imagining that the bond we had built would later be tested in ways I could not yet see. It was during this time that I met Rosie's parents for the first time. Jack had spoken of Rosie often, how she laughed easily, how she had a gentle heart, and how her presence seemed to make him brighter or calmer. When I met her, I welcomed her with open arms, hoping she would feel the warmth I had always given to Jack. Rosie was polite and kind, and I genuinely liked her. I thought that perhaps this new chapter could bring happiness not just to Jack but to all of us, expanding our family with love. Life continued, and Jack grew into a fine young man. He was polite, intelligent, and caring, though even then, subtle changes began. The excitement of being in love shifted his attention. I noticed it in the small things, the way he would linger longer on phone calls with Rosie, the way his laughter seemed to echo in rooms where I was not present, the way he began making decisions for the future without always consulting me. I reminded myself to be patient. After all, love had its own rhythm, and I could not expect him to remain the same child forever. The wedding preparations were a whirlwind of joy and subtle tension. I helped with the arrangements, guided them through family traditions, and tried to make sure the day reflected both love and faith. Jack was attentive, polite, and yet there was a shift, a quiet distance that I could feel but could not fully name. I noticed the way he deferred to Rosie in matters large and small, the way he seemed to seek her approval more than mine. I told myself that this was natural, that every couple must form its own space, and I tried to step back, offering support without intrusion. After the wedding, the house was quieter in ways I had not anticipated. Jack and Rosie moved into their own home, and the visits became less frequent. I would prepare meals for them, only to have them politely declined or postponed. I would call to check on them, and the conversations felt shorter, almost formal. I reminded myself that they were building their life, that I had done my part in preparing Jack for adulthood. And yet, a gentle ache settled in my heart, a quiet sorrow I could neither express nor dismiss. There were moments when I watched them together from a distance, Jack smiling at Rosie in ways that once belonged to me alone. I felt a pang, a gentle sadness, but I also felt gratitude. I had raised a son capable of deep love, and that was a comfort. I realized that motherhood is not about possession. It is about guiding, nurturing, and releasing. And so, I released him, even as a part of me longed for the closeness we once shared. In our small family, there was always laughter, even amid challenges. I have a younger sister, Mary's sister, who often called to check on me, offering gentle words of encouragement and reminding me that my love and patience were not unnoticed. Jack's friends, Marley and Bob, would sometimes visit, bringing energy and warmth, making our home lively again, if only briefly. These small connections reminded me that life continued, that love could be found in many forms, and that patience often carries its own reward. Even as Jack's attention shifted, I maintained my routines, preparing meals, tending the garden, reading the stories we once shared aloud. I found solace in prayer, in the quiet moments by the window where the sunlight filtered softly through the curtains. I spoke to God, silently asking for guidance, patience, and the wisdom to navigate this new chapter. I reminded myself that love, faith, and patience are intertwined, and that sometimes the most profound lessons are learned in the stillness of waiting. The house, once filled with Jack's youthful energy, now carried echoes of his presence rather than constant activity. I would set his plate at the table, leave a note in his books, or prepare a favorite dish, and sometimes he would respond with warmth. Sometimes he would forget, and still, I stayed patient, quietly loving, and gently guiding from afar. I realized that motherhood is often silent, enduring, and invisible, but never absent. The first signs of tension were subtle, almost invisible, but I felt them deeply. Jack would call less frequently, sometimes skipping days without a word. When he did call, his voice sounded hurried, polite, and distant. I could hear Rosie in the background, laughing or speaking softly, and though I told myself not to feel jealous, I could not help but notice the shift. The warmth that had once filled our conversations now felt like a gentle echo, faint but unmistakable. I reminded myself that this was normal, that a son's attention naturally shifts when he forms a new family. And yet, a hollow feeling grew quietly in my chest. One afternoon, I went to visit them, hoping to spend time and reconnect. Jack greeted me at the door, smiling, but there was a formality in his tone that I hadn't heard before. "Hello, Mom," he said. "It's nice to see you." His words were kind, but they lacked the warmth I had grown accustomed to. Rosie stood beside him, her presence gentle yet commanding in a way I could not explain. I stepped inside, offering my greetings, my hands full of food I had prepared with love. She thanked me politely, and Jack guided me to the living room. But I noticed a subtle tension in the air, a distance between us that had not been there before. As I set the food on the table, I caught glimpses of their interactions. Jack leaned slightly toward Rosie, listening intently, laughing at things I had no part in. They shared small touches, whispers, and inside jokes that left me feeling like an observer rather than a participant. I reminded myself that this was their life, that their bond deserved space to grow. But a part of me ached to be noticed, to be valued, to feel like I still belonged in his world. During lunch, Jack mentioned work and projects, speaking quickly, almost distractedly. I tried to join the conversation, asking about his day, his plans, subtle questions about his well-being. He answered, but the attention in his eyes was elsewhere, always drifting toward Rosie. She would gently place her hand on his arm, and he would respond with a soft smile that I recognized, a smile that once had been reserved for me. I swallowed the lump in my throat and smiled, quietly serving the food, and reminded myself that love often finds new expressions, and sometimes silence is the only way to preserve dignity. Later, while washing the dishes in the kitchen, I overheard a conversation between Jack and Rosie. I did not intend to listen, but the soft tones carried through the walls. "Mom means well, but sometimes she doesn't understand our plans," Rosie said. Jack replied, I know. She's just..." "Mom, I'll handle it." I paused, holding the sponge in my hand, feeling a quiet sting. Their words were not cruel, but they carried a subtle exclusion. I had not expected malice, but the shift in my place in his life was undeniable. I took a deep breath, finished the dishes, and sat quietly in the living room, letting the sound of rain pattering against the window fill the empty spaces of my heart. The tension grew in small, everyday moments. Jack would forget to call on special days, like my birthday or the anniversary of my late husband's passing. He would leave without saying goodbye properly, or forget details of our conversations from the week before. Rosie, always polite, sometimes unintentionally dominated the space, asking questions that I had once asked, caring for him in ways I used to. I reminded myself that this was love and life, that my role had changed, and that patience was my only refuge. One evening, I visited them again, carrying a warm meal and hoping for a calm, shared evening. As soon as I entered, I felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Rosie smiled, welcoming me warmly, but there was a quiet formality in the room. Jack, usually eager to help or engage, was distracted by his phone, nodding absent-mindedly to my words. I tried to make conversation, asking about work, about their day, about small joys. Jack responded politely, but the spark that once lit our interactions was gone, replaced by quiet distance. At a tea dinner, Jack hesitated before taking my hand for a brief greeting, as if unsure of the proper way to interact. Rosie guided the conversation, smiling softly, and Jack followed, sometimes glancing at me with a flicker of the boy I once knew. But that boy seemed distant now, replaced by a man shaped by new priorities, new love, and subtle shifts I could not control. I kept silent, offered smiles, and reminded myself that my love had to be quiet, patient, and enduring. After dinner, I cleared the table alone. Jack and Rosie sat on the couch, speaking softly, laughing at moments I did not understand. I washed the dishes, drying them carefully, each movement steady, controlled, calm. I realized that the life I had built around him, daily routines, shared laughter, quiet support, was gradually becoming a memory rather than a present reality. I felt a gentle pang of loneliness, but I reminded myself that love is not measured by attention alone. I had done my part. I had given everything. The days that followed were filled with similar small tensions. Jack called sporadically, sometimes forgetting to ask about me, sometimes brushing past details I considered important. Rosie, kind and caring, inadvertently became the focal point of his attention, as she naturally would in a new marriage. I reminded myself again that this was life, that change is inevitable, and that patience is a mother's quiet companion. There were moments of small comfort, too. Jack would remember something I had taught him, or recall a memory from childhood that made him smile. In those brief flashes, I felt the warmth of connection, a reassurance that love endures even when it is quietly tested. I held on to those moments, cherishing them like hidden treasures in the midst of growing distance. Even in my loneliness, I found ways to remain connected. I prepared letters, small notes, meals that carried memories, hoping that my presence would remain a gentle, guiding thread in their lives. I never forced interaction, never demanded attention, only offered my love silently, steadfastly. The tension in the house, the subtle shift in my son's attention, became part of the rhythm of my days. I learned to move gently through it, finding strength in patience, wisdom in silence, and comfort in prayer. And this is where my story pauses, where the rising tension is set, and the first signs of distance become unmistakable. The subtle exclusion, the quiet changes in behavior, the gentle shift of priorities, these are the beginnings of a slow emotional drift that will test patience, endurance, and love in ways I could not yet see. The tension between us grew slowly, like water wearing down stone. It wasn't sudden, but every small instance of forgetfulness, distraction, or unintentional exclusion left a mark on my heart. Jack no longer sought my advice in the way he once did. Decisions that used to involve me, small matters like which carpet to buy or how to arrange the furniture, he now discussed only with Rosie. At first, I told myself it was natural. He was building a home with his wife, and they needed their own space. But deep down, a quiet ache settled in me, a feeling of being replaced, or perhaps forgotten. One evening, I visited them with a freshly baked pie. I had always loved baking, and Jack used to beam at my small gestures, eating in silence while sharing stories about school, friends, or small adventures. Today, I placed the pie on the kitchen counter and called out, "Jack, Rosie, I brought something for dessert." He came into the kitchen, smiling politely, but his eyes were fleeting, already half focused on his phone. Rosie thanked me warmly, her tone gentle, and they exchanged a quick glance as if confirming a silent plan. I felt invisible in that exchange, a quiet observer of a world I had once been at the center of. Dinner was calm but distant. Jack's laughter no longer reached me in the same way. Rosie steered the conversation, asking questions, sharing stories, while Jack nodded and laughed softly. I tried to participate, asking about their day, offering thoughts, memories, or advice, but my words seemed to drift past them. It was not cruel, not deliberately excluding, but there was a shift, like a room that had grown slightly larger without me at the center. I felt the space between us widen, though I stayed calm, my hands resting on my lap, my heart quietly observing. The small signs of distance began to accumulate. Jack would forget to call me at times he previously never would have missed. Rosie, always considerate, sometimes gently reminded him, "Mom called yesterday. Did you talk to her?" And Jack would reply softly, almost apologetically, "I'll call her later." That later often became tomorrow or next week. And yet, I remained silent. I reminded myself that patience is a form of love, that endurance is not weakness, and that sometimes the strongest presence is quiet and unassuming. There were afternoons when I would visit, hoping to reconnect. I would stand in the doorway, watching them interact, Jack leaning slightly toward Rosie, Rosie smiling, whispering something that made him laugh. I would step in, offer greetings, and they would respond warmly, but the closeness I once shared with Jack felt distant, like a photograph fading over time. I would help with small chores, quietly fixing the table, arranging plates, or fetching a cup of tea. Each movement, each gesture, was performed with love, but the warmth of mutual attention I once knew was now scarce. One day, Jack forgot to mention my visit entirely. I arrived with a basket of fresh fruit, only to find him and Rosie engrossed in conversation. He looked up, a faint surprise crossing his face, then smiled politely. "Oh, Mom, you're here." There was a slight awkwardness in his tone that I had never heard before. I set the basket down quietly, nodded, and began helping with preparations. It was a small moment, almost insignificant, but to me, it was a signal. The center of his world was shifting, and I had to adjust my place within it. As the weeks passed, subtle tensions grew. Jack would arrive late for visits, distracted by work or Rosie's family matters. I noticed the way he deferred to her for decisions, even minor ones, without consulting me. Once, I suggested a slight change in the arrangement of the living room, and Jack looked at Rosie, waiting for her approval. She smiled softly, and he nodded, following her suggestion rather than mine. I felt a quiet sting, but I reminded myself that love often requires letting go, and that patience is the only way to preserve dignity in such moments. I began to spend more time alone, reflecting on the subtle changes in our relationship. My home, once bustling with Jack's energy, now carried echoes of the past. I found solace in prayer, reading quietly near the window, watching sunlight filter through the curtains, reminding myself that love endures even in silence. I kept busy with small tasks, tending the garden, preparing meals, and writing in my journal. Each day, I carried a quiet strength, a determination to remain present in his life even as he drifted toward another. One rainy evening, I overheard a conversation that left a lasting impression. Jack was speaking softly to Rosie. "I just don't want to hurt Mom's feelings, but we have our own way now," Rosie replied gently. "She'll understand. She's patient. And she loves you." I held the broom in my hand, paused, and let the words sink in. There was no malice, only truth. The space I once held in his life had shifted. I felt a tear in the fabric of my heart. Yet I maintained composure, finishing the chores quietly, reminding myself that enduring love does not demand recognition. Even in these moments, there were flashes of connection. Sometimes Jack would remember a detail from my stories, or share a small memory that made him laugh. Those moments, fleeting as they were, reminded me that our bond was not gone, only evolving. I treasured them silently, letting them sustain my patience and reinforce the enduring presence of maternal love. I began to notice small patterns. Jack would glance at me briefly before smiling at Rosie, a flicker of guilt or nostalgia in his eyes. Rosie, always considerate, would sometimes step back, giving us a moment to share a quiet laugh or a memory. These fleeting moments became treasures, tiny islands of warmth amidst the growing distance. I learned to savor them without expectation, holding the joy quietly in my heart. During this time, Marley and Bob, Jack's longtime friends, visited occasionally. Their presence brought laughter back into the room, a reminder of Jack's childhood and the warmth we once shared. Yet even among friends, I noticed the subtle shifts: the way Jack would include Rosie in decisions, the way conversations naturally gravitated toward his new life. I smiled and joined in, silently reinforcing my place as a guiding presence rather than a central one. The days and weeks blurred together. Small disappointments, forgotten calls, and subtle exclusions became part of the rhythm of life. I stayed patient, keeping my love steady and unassuming, quietly guiding through presence rather than insistence. I realized that motherhood is often invisible, enduring quietly, a silent strength that shapes the lives of children without fanfare or recognition. The day that changed everything began quietly, almost innocuously. I had gone to their house with a basket of fresh bread and some fruit, hoping to spend the afternoon together. Jack opened the door, polite, smiling, yet there was a subtle formality in the way he spoke, a stiffness I had not noticed before. Rosie stood beside him, her presence warm but firm, and they exchanged a brief glance that made me feel like an outsider in a world I had once been central to. I reminded myself to stay calm, to focus on the love I still had for my son, and to not let the unease creep into my voice. Inside, the house was tidy, perfectly arranged, almost too perfect. I set down the basket and greeted them, asking about their day. Jack responded, polite but distracted, while Rosie smiled and guided the conversation, ensuring everything flowed smoothly. I noticed how Jack deferred to her on almost everything: the seating, the tea, even the placement of the fruit I had brought. I felt a quiet pang in my chest, but I reminded myself it was their life now, and I had to accept that my role was changing. Then, the turning point came without warning. While I was helping with some minor chores in the kitchen, I overheard Jack and Rosie speaking in hushed tones in the living room. At first, I thought I must have misheard, but the words became unmistakable. "Mom doesn't understand our plans," Rosie said softly. "I know," Jack replied, almost in agreement. "But she'll adjust. She always does. She won't argue." My hands froze mid-motion. I could feel my heart tighten, my chest constricting. These words were not cruel, yet they carried a weight I could not ignore. I realized then that my presence, my guidance, and my love were being quietly overlooked, that my opinions, my feelings, were being pushed aside in favor of a new reality that I could neither stop nor fully accept. I took a deep breath, finishing what I was doing, and quietly stepped into the living room. Jack smiled at me, a flicker of the sun I knew, but it was brief. Rosie's smile was warm, her tone polite. I tried to join the conversation, speaking about small matters, my voice calm, steady, gentle. Yet every word seemed to drift past them, unnoticed or dismissed. The emotional distance I had felt before now solidified into something tangible, a subtle, invisible wall between us. Later that evening, Jack received a phone call, and I sat quietly in the corner observing. He spoke in a soft, hurried tone, laughing occasionally, but his attention never fully returned to me. Rosie leaned closer, whispering something that made him nod and smile. I held my hands in my lap, feeling a quiet ache. It was a moment that could have been ordinary, but it struck me deeply. I realized that my son, the boy I had nurtured and guided, was now choosing to live more fully in a space where I was no longer central. The subtle betrayals continued in the following weeks. Jack would forget small details I had once been part of: the way he liked his tea, the books he enjoyed reading, the routines we had maintained for years. Rosie, without intention, assumed my roles, offering suggestions, guiding conversations, and shaping the household in ways I had once done. Each instance was gentle, polite, and natural, yet to me, it carried the sting of exclusion. I stayed silent, as I always had, reminding myself that love does not always demand recognition. One day, Jack invited a few of his friends over. I had prepared a small snack to share, but when I arrived, I noticed the casual way he spoke to them, the laughter shared with Rosie, and the subtle nods he gave her when making decisions. I joined in politely, offering food and gentle conversation, but the rhythm of our interactions was no longer ours alone. My place in his world was being quietly reshaped, and the realization hit me fully. I was slowly being forgotten, not through malice, but through the natural progression of life, marriage, and new priorities. There were moments of confrontation I resisted. I wanted to ask him directly, "Do you still see me as your mother?" But I could not. I knew that such a question might create tension, resentment, or guilt, none of which would help our relationship. So, I chose silence, choosing instead to demonstrate my enduring love through small acts of care, preparing meals, remembering small details, leaving notes. and occasionally sharing stories that connected us to the past. Even as the distance grew, there were flashes of recognition. Once, Jack remembered a memory from my childhood stories and smiled, his eyes briefly meeting mine with warmth. In those moments, I realized that bonds of love cannot be entirely severed, even when the external rhythms of life change. Yet, the turning point was clear. My son's attention had shifted, subtly but unmistakably, and the emotional center of his life now revolved around Rosie. I began to understand that patience would be my companion in this period of change. The ache of exclusion, the sting of subtle forgetfulness, and the quiet displacement were all part of a lesson I had to endure with dignity. I prayed for guidance, asking God to help me navigate the slow unraveling of the intimacy I once shared with Jack. I reminded myself that motherhood is enduring, even when unacknowledged, and that love can be expressed through patience, prayer, and quiet support. One evening, alone by the window, I reflected on the life I had built around Jack. I remembered his first steps, his first words, the nights I stayed awake praying for his safety, and the countless sacrifices made in love. And I understood, with a calm ache, that the turning point was not about betrayal in the traditional sense, but about the natural shift of priorities that comes with adulthood and marriage. The realization was both painful and necessary. I could not stop life from moving forward, but I could maintain my place in it through patience, enduring love, and silent strength. The turning point had arrived. It was quiet, subtle, and almost imperceptible to anyone else, but to me, it was unmistakable. Jack was no longer the boy who needed me in every moment. He was a man building a new life, with new priorities and new attentions. I stayed silent, as always, holding on to love, faith, and hope. The emotional breaking point was not marked by anger or confrontation, but by quiet realization, a mother slowly seeing her child step into a new world where her presence was no longer central. The weeks after that quiet realization brought a weight I had never anticipated. Jack's new life seemed to flourish around Rosie's gentle guidance, and I often felt like an observer, quietly standing on the sidelines of a world that had once revolved around me. It wasn't that he intentionally ignored me, nor that Rosie tried to push me away. It was simply the natural course of life, yet the ache of being slowly forgotten cut deeply. One afternoon, I went to visit them with a basket of fresh bread and a few homemade treats. As I entered, the house was alive with quiet conversation, soft laughter, and the hum of domesticity. Jack greeted me, his voice polite and cheerful, but the warmth I had once felt was no longer the same. Rosie's presence was calm and commanding, and she directed the conversation effortlessly, gently steering Jack to focus on her. I tried to join in, sharing small memories, offering thoughts, and commenting on the meal, but each word seemed to drift past, acknowledged politely but without the spark that once made us inseparable. Later, I noticed Jack hesitating before speaking to me about a minor household decision. He glanced at Rosie, seeking her opinion first. The moment was brief, yet it pierced my heart. I realized then that my influence, my input, and the bond we had carefully nurtured for years were no longer central to his daily life. The quiet acknowledgement of my presence was all I received. I smiled, maintained composure, and offered my advice gently, letting it rest in the background as they proceeded with their plans. The subtle shifts became clearer over time. Jack would forget to update me on small achievements or ask for guidance in matters he previously sought my counsel. Rosie's involvement, polite and kind, naturally assumed the space I once occupied. The realization hit me harder with each passing day. My son's attention, once entirely devoted to me, was now shared, sometimes overwhelmingly, with another. I did not resent them, yet the emotional distance felt like a slow, unrelenting tide pulling us apart. One evening, I observed a quiet exchange that solidified the turning point for me. Jack had received a message on his phone, and Rosie leaned in, whispering something that made him nod and smile softly. Their connection was intimate, calm, and warm. I sat quietly in the corner, pretending to read, while my heart acknowledged a painful truth. I was no longer the emotional center of his life. The realization was not sudden, but it was definitive. I was being slowly forgotten not through neglect, but through love reshaped and redirected. The emotional strain became apparent in moments that once would have been simple and joyful. A shared meal, a conversation about his work, or a weekend visit. Every interaction carried a subtle tension, a distance I could neither erase nor confront. Jack's words remained polite, his actions respectful, yet I could feel the invisible shift in the energy between us. Rosie's gentle influence, always well-intentioned, had altered the rhythm of our relationship, and I had to adapt without complaint. During one visit, I tried to bridge the distance. I brought out photographs from Jack's childhood, pointing out small memories and moments of joy. He glanced at them, smiling briefly, but his attention wandered back to Rosie, who sat beside him, gently holding his hand. I felt the quiet sting of exclusion, yet I maintained calm, speaking softly about the memories, letting the emotions flow through my words without expectation of reciprocation. I reminded myself that love does not always demand acknowledgement, and patience is a mother's quiet strength. Even as the turning point became evident, there were moments of fleeting connection. Jack would occasionally remember a small detail from our past or laugh at a memory only we shared. These brief flashes of intimacy were bittersweet, reminding me of the bond that still existed, yet highlighting the reality of its diminished presence. I held on to these moments quietly, savoring them as treasures that reinforced the enduring nature of maternal love. The tension reached its peak one rainy evening. I visited them with a basket of food, hoping for a calm dinner together. The rain tapped softly against the windows as I entered, and the warm light of the kitchen reflected the calm yet distant energy in the room. Jack and Rosie greeted me warmly, yet there was an unmistakable formality in their tone. During dinner, Rosie guided the conversation, asking questions and sharing stories, while Jack's attention followed her naturally. I contributed sparingly, offering small comments and observations, my voice calm and steady, yet the ache in my chest was undeniable. After dinner, I quietly helped clear the table, observing them interact. Jack leaned slightly toward Rosie, speaking softly, laughing at something she said, while I moved among the dishes in silence. It was a simple act, yet the symbolism was clear. My place in his life had shifted irrevocably. The turning point was complete not through confrontation or betrayal, but through the quiet reality of life, marriage, and changing priorities. I felt the full weight of this realization, yet I remained composed, reminding myself that love does not always need recognition, and that patience can be a mother's most profound strength. As I left that evening, the rain falling softly on my umbrella, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The subtle betrayals, the unintentional exclusions, and the quiet distance were not acts of malice, but the natural course of change. And yet, the ache in my heart reminded me of the depth of my love, the sacrifices made, and the enduring bond that could never truly be broken. I walked home slowly, praying for guidance, patience, and the wisdom to continue loving quietly, steadfastly, and without expectation. After the turning point, life settled into a new rhythm, one I had not chosen but had to accept. The quiet ache of exclusion remained, yet I understood that my role as a mother had transformed. Jack was no longer the little boy who needed me in every moment. He was a man building a life with Rosie, and that life required his attention and care. I reminded myself daily that love does not demand recognition, and patience can be as powerful as any act of intervention. The first step toward resolution came with acceptance. I stopped waiting for Jack to seek me out or include me in every decision. Instead, I focused on the moments we still shared, however brief they might be. I began to notice the small ways he still cared, his soft smile when I brought a favorite dish, the brief acknowledgement of memories only we shared, the rare times he would pause mid-conversation to ask how I was feeling. These small gestures became the threads that held our connection together, reminding me that even as the center of his attention shifted, our bond remained unbroken. Rosie, too, became a part of the resolution process. At first, I felt subtle tension in her presence, a quiet competition for Jack's attention that I knew was unnecessary. Over time, however, I began to see her care for him in ways I could appreciate rather than resent. She was gentle, thoughtful, and kind, and her love for Jack was genuine. I learned to acknowledge her role not as a replacement, but as a complement to the love I had nurtured in him for so many years. Accepting her presence allowed me to let go of some of the bitterness and sadness I had quietly carried. We began to share more intentional moments together. I would visit, and instead of focusing on the ways our relationship had changed, I concentrated on creating warmth and comfort. I shared stories from the past, recalling childhood adventures, lessons learned, and small moments of joy. Jack would listen, sometimes smiling softly, sometimes recalling details that surprised me. The laughter was quieter than it had once been, but it was genuine, and I cherished it. Slowly, I realized that resolution did not require the restoration of our past closeness but the acknowledgement of the love that still existed. Even in a new form, there were moments of reflection that helped me move forward. I would sit by the window, watch the sunlight filter through the curtains, and remember the early years of Jack's life, the long nights, the scraped knees, the endless lullabies. I reminded myself that motherhood is not a possession but a guiding light, one that continues to shine even when the child steps into a world beyond our immediate control. My prayers became calmer, my heart steadier, and my acceptance deeper. One evening, I prepared a special dinner and invited both Jack and Rosie. As we sat together, the atmosphere was warm, calm, and sincere. I shared small stories, offered gentle advice, and spoke of memories that only we could understand. Jack listened, occasionally nodding, occasionally laughing softly, while Rosie's presence added harmony rather than tension. The meal ended with a quiet sense of togetherness, not as it had been in the past, but as a new form of family connection, one that included love, respect, and understanding. Even as I accepted the changes, I allowed myself moments of private sadness. I would reflect on the distance, the subtle exclusions, and the realization that my son's attention was now divided. These moments were not filled with anger or resentment but with quiet reflection, a gentle mourning for the life we once had. I reminded myself that acknowledging sadness does not diminish love. Instead, it honors the depth of the bond we shared. I also learned to communicate differently. Rather than expecting Jack to notice my efforts, I began to express my feelings subtly, sharing memories or small acts of care without demanding recognition. I found that this approach nurtured a sense of closeness that was calmer, more patient, and enduring. Jack responded naturally, sometimes with a smile, sometimes with a quiet gesture that spoke volumes. The distance between us remained, but the warmth returned, reshaped into something sustainable and heartfelt. Throughout this period, I focused on spiritual reflection. I prayed quietly, asking God to guide my heart, strengthen my patience, and help me maintain love without expectation. I realized that the resolution was not about changing Jack or Rosie but about transforming my own heart, letting go of the longing for past closeness, embracing the present, and finding peace in enduring love. As weeks passed, our visits became calmer, more intentional, and more meaningful. I began to notice Jack's subtle gestures of care, Rosie's gentle inclusion of me in their life, and the quiet moments of connection that had once seemed impossible. These moments reminded me that resolution is not instantaneous but gradual, built through patience, understanding, and silent endurance. I also reconnected with Marley Bob and my sister, Marley's sister, seeking small sources of warmth and friendship outside the home. Their support reminded me that love and connection are not limited to one child or one household. They exist in many forms, in many hearts, and are nurtured through patience and care. These connections strengthened me, allowing me to approach Jack and Rosie with calm confidence, quiet acceptance, and enduring love. One afternoon, Jack approached me with a small gift, a book he remembered I loved as a child. His smile was soft, genuine, and I saw a flicker of the boy I once knew. "I thought you might like this, Mom," he said quietly. My heart warmed, And I realized that resolution is not about reclaiming what was lost, but recognizing the love that still exists, even when life has moved forward. We shared a quiet laugh, and I felt the subtle restoration of connection, not as it had been before, but as it could be now. The emotional tension that had built over weeks began to ease. I no longer felt the sting of being overlooked. Instead, I embraced the small, meaningful moments that reminded me of the enduring bond between mother and son. Rosie, too, became a source of comfort rather than quiet competition. I realized that resolution is not about erasing pain, but about accepting change, nurturing love quietly, and finding peace in the subtle expressions of care and connection. The weeks that followed brought moments of quiet understanding between Jack, Rosie, and me. The tension that had once filled our visits slowly softened, replaced by small gestures of care and subtle recognition. Jack would remember details about my day, sometimes ask for advice in a gentle, respectful way, and occasionally pause to reflect on memories we shared. Rosie, too, began including me more naturally, asking if I wanted to join them for small decisions or helping to ensure my comfort in their home. These small shifts did not erase the past, but they wove a new thread of connection that I could cherish. I realized that resolution was not about reclaiming the life I had before. Jack was building a family, making choices that were natural for a husband and a man growing into adulthood. My role as a mother had transformed. I no longer needed to be the center of every conversation, nor did I need constant attention to feel valued. Instead, my presence, my care, and my patience became quiet reminders of enduring love. I found peace in knowing that though my son's attention was shared, the bond between us could still exist in a calmer, more mature form. One evening, I visited them with a basket of freshly baked pastries. Jack greeted me warmly, and for the first time in weeks, he seemed genuinely eager to share the afternoon with me. Rosie smiled softly, and there was no sense of tension, only a gentle warmth. We sat at the dining table, sharing tea, pastries, and stories from the past. I spoke softly of small memories, his first day at school, a funny incident with Marley, and the quiet moments we shared when he was little. Jack listened attentively, occasionally laughing, occasionally nodding, and I felt the subtle restoration of connection. There were also moments of reflection for myself. I spent quiet mornings by the window, observing sunlight on the garden, thinking about the journey we had been through. I recognized that patience had been my teacher, that silence had been my companion, and that enduring love was the truest form of guidance. I prayed for Jack, for Rosie, and for our family, asking God to strengthen our bond, to guide our hearts, and to allow love and understanding to flourish despite life's natural shifts. One afternoon, Rosie approached me with a gentle smile. "I know this is your home too," she said softly, placing a small hand on my arm. "I hope we can make it a space where you feel included." Her words, simple yet heartfelt, touched me deeply. I realized then that resolution was not only between me and Jack but also with her. Accepting her presence and kindness allowed the tension I had carried silently to ease. I smiled, feeling a quiet warmth, and replied, "Thank you. That means a lot." As our interactions grew calmer, I noticed small acts of consideration from Jack. He would sometimes remember the little things I liked, the meals I enjoyed, or the stories I cherished. He would occasionally ask questions about my thoughts, making me feel valued without forcing attention or recognition. These moments, though subtle, reminded me that the mother-son bond, though transformed, still held strength, warmth, and depth. The resolution process also included forgiveness, not of a deliberate wrongdoing, but of the pain caused by unintentional exclusion. I forgave myself for feeling sadness, forgave Jack for his natural shift of attention, and forgave Rosie for occupying a space I had once held exclusively. Forgiveness was not easy. It required patience, self-reflection, and spiritual guidance. Yet as I embraced it, my heart felt lighter, my perspective calmer, and my love freer. During visits, I began to focus on creating shared experiences rather than dwelling on what had changed. I cooked small meals, shared simple stories, and engaged in gentle conversations. Jack responded naturally, often including me in discussions and decisions in subtle ways. Rosie's warmth complemented these moments, creating a sense of harmony that had been missing before. I realized that resolution does not erase the past but builds a foundation for continued connection in the present. One day, Jack and I went for a short walk in the garden, alone. The sun was warm, the breeze gentle, and the air carried a calm serenity. We spoke quietly about his childhood, his ambitions, and the lessons he had learned. I listened, smiling softly, offering guidance when asked. He paused, turned to me, and said, "Mom, I may not always show it, but I value everything you've done for me." My heart filled with quiet relief and warmth. In that moment, I understood that resolution is not always loud or dramatic. It often comes in quiet affirmations, small gestures, and shared understanding. Over time, our relationship regained a sense of balance. I no longer expected constant attention or validation. I focused on presence, patience, and love. Jack's attention, though shared with Rosie, was sincere and heartfelt when directed toward me. Rosie, once a subtle source of tension, became a partner in nurturing the family dynamic, creating an environment of warmth, kindness, and inclusion. The emotional storm had calmed, leaving a steady rhythm of love and respect. I also embraced spiritual reflection as part of resolution. I reminded myself daily that God sees all struggles, all silent sacrifices, and all enduring love. Through prayer, patience, and reflection, I found strength, peace, and guidance. I understood that resolution is as much about transforming one's own heart as it is about restoring external relationships. Accepting change, embracing patience, and offering forgiveness became my guiding principles. As months passed, I noticed the small, meaningful gestures that marked true connection. Jack would bring me a cup of tea without prompting, ask about my health, or share a memory that made us both smile. Rosie would invite me to participate in small household decisions, showing respect for my presence. These gestures were quiet but profound, reminders that love, patience, and endurance could restore connection even after distance and tension. The months that followed felt like a gentle ebb and flow, a rhythm of life that I had learned to embrace with patience and quiet understanding. Jack had grown into a man with responsibilities, love, and commitments that extended beyond our bond, yet the connection we shared remained, subtle but enduring. I realized that endings are rarely abrupt. They are often gradual, a slow unfolding of acceptance, love, and reflection. I began to see our relationship in a new light. My role as a mother had transformed, but it was no less important. Instead of striving to be the center of Jack's world, I focused on being a steady, supportive presence. The joy was no longer in constant attention but in small, meaningful moments. A soft smile across the table, a brief conversation about memories, or Jack remembering a detail I had shared years ago. These moments reminded me that love, though reshaped, could endure in its own quiet, profound way. Rosie's presence became a source of calm rather than tension. I noticed the subtle ways she sought my inclusion, asking my opinion gently, respecting my advice, and sometimes even sharing her own feelings about motherhood and family. Slowly, I came to appreciate her as a partner in our shared love for Jack, someone who complemented rather than competed with me. Accepting her warmth allowed my heart to heal further, and I felt a deep sense of peace that had been absent during the months of subtle distance and quiet hurt. I also spent more time reflecting on my own life. Outside of the home I shared with Jack, I nurtured hobbies, reconnected with friends and family, and found joy in the small, everyday acts of living. This independence brought a new sense of strength. I realized that patience, endurance, and quiet love were not signs of weakness. They were evidence of a heart that could withstand change and embrace growth without losing compassion or grace. Prayer became my anchor during this time. Each morning and evening, I would turn to God, expressing gratitude for the lessons learned, asking for patience in moments of longing, and seeking guidance in navigating the transformed dynamics of my family. I understood that life's challenges often come not to break us, but to refine us, to teach us patience, humility, and the power of silent strength. Each prayer was a reminder that enduring love and faith are intertwined, shaping the way we respond to life's quiet trials. One afternoon, Jack and I shared a long conversation. He spoke about his work, his hopes for the future, and the ways he wanted to honor the family he was building with Rosie. I listened quietly, offering soft guidance when asked, sharing memories and gentle advice, and allowing him space to express himself freely. In that exchange, I felt the subtle restoration of trust, connection, and understanding. I understood then that resolution is not about erasing the past or reclaiming a former closeness, it is about embracing the present with grace, love, and patience. Small gestures became powerful symbols of connection. Jack would sometimes call me unexpectedly, ask about my day, or share a simple joke that reminded us of our shared past. Rosie's warmth reinforced these moments, creating a sense of harmony in which I felt included rather than sidelined. I realized that love can exist quietly, steadily, and without dramatic displays. These moments, though subtle, were profound reminders that patience and faith can nurture bonds even after distance and change. I also began to reflect on the lessons learned from this journey. Life does not always follow the path we expect. Relationships shift, priorities change, and roles evolve. Yet love, patience, and silent endurance remain constant. I understood that God's wisdom is often revealed through these subtle challenges, teaching us resilience, empathy, and the strength to love without demanding attention or recognition. This reflection brought a calm clarity, allowing me to embrace the present without clinging to what had been lost. As time passed, the moments of quiet connection multiplied. Jack would pause to ask for advice, laugh at a shared memory, or include me in small family rituals. Rosie, always considerate, ensured that my presence was acknowledged and valued. These gestures, small yet meaningful, reinforced the truth that love is not diminished by distance or shifting attention. It can adapt, endure, and grow stronger through patience and understanding. I began to notice the profound beauty in silence. Not every word needs to be spoken, not every gesture needs recognition. Love, when steady and enduring, finds its way through quiet acts, subtle gestures, and shared understanding. Watching Jack and Rosie build their life together, while still including me in gentle, meaningful ways, reminded me that motherhood is not about control or attention, it is about presence, patience, and unwavering care. The months culminated in a calm evening of reflection. I sat by the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon, casting warm golden light across the garden. I thought of Jack, of Rosie, and of the journey we had shared. The ache of distance had softened into quiet acceptance. The subtle exclusions had transformed into moments of understanding, and the love I had nurtured for decades had found new expression. I smiled softly, knowing that patience, silent strength, and enduring faith had carried me through. The final weeks of this journey brought a sense of calm that I had not felt in many months. Jack, Rosie, and I had settled into a rhythm that was quiet, gentle, and understanding. Our relationship no longer resembled what it had once been, yet it had grown into something equally meaningful, a connection rooted in patience, love, and mutual respect. I realized that endings are not always abrupt. They are often a slow weaving together of acceptance, forgiveness, and enduring care. During this period, I found myself reflecting deeply on the lessons life had taught me. I remembered the nights I had stayed awake praying for Jack's safety, the days filled with small sacrifices, and the moments of joy and laughter that had shaped his childhood. I realized that my love had always been unconditional, and that unconditional love does not demand attention or recognition, it simply exists, quietly, steadfastly, and without expectation. Islamic reflection became central to my understanding of this journey. I recalled the teachings that emphasize patience, humility, and the importance of maintaining family bonds. I prayed for Jack and Rosie, asking God to bless their marriage, guide their hearts, and protect them in all aspects of life. I prayed for myself, seeking strength to love without resentment, to remain patient in moments of quiet hurt, and to embrace the shifting dynamics of our family with grace. Through prayer, I felt a gentle reassurance that God sees every silent struggle, every quiet act of love, and every moment of endurance. I also began sharing stories and wisdom with Jack, not as lessons he had to follow, but as reflections from my heart. We spoke quietly about the values of kindness, honesty, and patience, weaving these conversations into everyday life. Rosie listened with warmth and respect, sometimes adding her own insights. Together, we created an environment of learning, reflection, and love where the past was honored, the present was embraced, and the future held hope. There were still moments of sadness, as memories of our old closeness surfaced unexpectedly. I would recall the days when Jack depended on me for every little thing, when our home was filled with laughter, questions, and shared secrets. These reflections sometimes brought tears to my eyes, but I learned to accept them as part of my healing. I reminded myself that motherhood is enduring, not defined by constant proximity or attention, but by the love and guidance we continue to offer silently and faithfully. One afternoon, Jack brought me a small gift, a handwritten note expressing gratitude for my guidance and love over the years. His words were simple, yet they carried a weight that touched my heart deeply. Rosie had encouraged him to express his feelings, and together they had created a moment that acknowledged the bond we shared. I smiled softly, feeling warmth, pride, and a quiet sense of closure. These gestures, though small, reminded me that love, patience, and enduring faith can heal subtle wounds and restore connection. I also reflected on the broader lessons of this experience. Life often presents challenges that are not meant to punish us, but to teach us patience, empathy, and strength. When we feel overlooked, forgotten, or excluded, it is an opportunity to exercise quiet resilience, trust in God's wisdom, and embrace love without expectation. Through this journey, I learned that silence can be powerful, patience can be transformative, and enduring love can bridge even the widest distances. In these months, I also connected more deeply with my own faith. I found solace in the verses of the Quran that remind us to trust in God's plan, maintain patience, and care for family with unwavering devotion. I realized that every trial, every subtle hurt, and every moment of quiet endurance is seen by God. And in this realization, I found peace, strength, and hope for the future. The emotional reconciliation was not about dramatic apologies or grand gestures. It was about quiet acknowledgement, subtle recognition, and ongoing love. Jack continued to grow as a husband, Rosie as a wife, and I as a mother, finding new ways to connect and nurture. The balance was delicate, yet it was filled with sincerity, respect, and warmth. Each shared smile, each gentle conversation, each thoughtful gesture became a small testament to the enduring power of love and faith. On the final evening of this reflection, I sat quietly by the window, watching the sun set, casting a soft glow across the garden. I thought of Jack, Rosie, and the journey that had brought us here. The ache of distance had softened into gentle acceptance. The subtle exclusions had transformed into meaningful gestures, and the love I had nurtured had found new expression. I prayed silently, giving thanks for patience, faith, and the enduring strength of the mother's heart. And in this quiet moment, I felt a profound sense of understanding. Life's challenges are not to diminish us, but to refine our hearts, to teach us compassion, and to guide us toward enduring love. The journey of motherhood does not end when children grow or change, it evolves, guided by patience, prayer, and unwavering care. And this is where my story truly concludes. Life doesn't always give us answers right away. Sometimes, God asks us to stay patient, stay kind, and stay silent, not because we are weak, but because He sees what others do not. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect. Maybe someone needed this reminder today. Thank you for listening with an open heart. May God see every silent struggle and replace pain with peace. Until next time, this was Voice of Auntie Universe.